Perhaps one of the more unusual ideas we've heard comes from former President Donald Trump, who talks about maybe getting rid of the income tax and just replacing it with tariffs. Tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods, which Donald Trump continues to sell as somehow being a tax on China and other countries. What he doesn't tell you is that tariffs are taxes on you, the consumer, because the company or the country paying the tariff is going to pass that on in the form of higher prices. And as you know, one of my favorites on social media posted, if Joe Biden proposed eliminating the federal income tax and replacing it with tariffs, business media would be losing their bleeping minds. Well, over the weekend, a few more business media outlets have, in fact, talked about how crazy that would be for the economy. For one thing, you're looking at, if you were to get rid of the income tax, you'd be looking at a tariff of about 85% on goods. And think about just how many goods you now rely on from other countries because of the way manufacturing has been outsourced for the past generation or so. That's just one example of, again, where political rhetoric may not reflect reality or their record. And for that and more, we're going to talk to Megan Rowe, who's the program director for the group Opportunity Wisconsin. Megan, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Well, good. You know, we've got a pretty good thunderstorm rolling through here up in Chippewa Falls, but hopefully folks are taking heed and using good caution on that. But, you know, that otherwise we continue following what all these groups are talking about, what they're saying, what these candidates want to do. And so I wanted to learn more about what Opportunity Wisconsin sees as its mission to kind of make sure that economic messaging is on the up and up, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having us. As you said, I'm Megan Rowe, program director with Opportunity Wisconsin, and we are a nonpartisan issue advocacy organization. And so we do work across the state to connect with folks to help them lift their voices and share their stories to advocate for policies that support working families and seniors across the state. And so we have been working since early 2020 on this mission. And over the last year, we've specifically been working to hold Congressman Brian Stile and Congressman Derek Van Orden accountable on some of these economic policies, as you mentioned.
And you do that for what reason? I mean, I kind of hinted at it already with the rhetoric versus the record, but when you cite Stile and Van Orden, you know, as relatively new members of Congress in battleground districts, what do you feel? How are you filling in the blanks for the voters there compared to what they may be hearing from the incumbent and the special interest money behind them?
Sure. Well, you know, one of the things that, as I mentioned, is a through line for us is talking about policies that impact working families and seniors. And over the last year, we really have felt that both Congressman Stile and Van Orden have taken votes or have been silent on issues that are really impacting folks across the state, particularly in the 3rd and the 1st congressional districts. And so we've been working over the past year to connect with constituents, to educate them about these votes that are coming up in Congress and helping them raise their voice and make sure that they are heard on these issues.
So one of your latest projects, as you mentioned, with Congressman Stile, is a new ad that is talking about whether credit card companies should be allowed to charge higher fees. And so, what are you saying about those members of Congress when it comes to the fees that credit card companies have been attaching onto our bills for years? It seems like.
Sure. Well, we all know that costs are high in some areas, and we want to make sure that policies are enabling working families and seniors to be able to put food on the table to make ends meet. And the last thing we need is, another fee taking away money that would otherwise go to pay our medical bills or buy groceries. And so recently, Congressman Stile took a vote in committee that would have allowed credit card companies to continue charging exorbitant late fees on working families and seniors. And so it really boggles the mind why someone would think that was good policy. And so we recently launched an ad, as you mentioned, to hold him accountable for that vote and encourage him should this vote come before the full House to change his stance on this issue.
And so the campaign that you mentioned, you tell us more about it in an opinion column that you can find over at upnorthnewswi.com. The headline is "1 year later, Representative Stile and Van Orden still owe Wisconsinites answers about how they will fight for working families." And the things that they need to do. Now, you talk about holding events and doing campaigns and highlighting the importance of these policies. I know that if Congressman Van Orden or Stile were to be asked about this, they would, and this just goes to show you how legislation, they give it every possible kind of name. They've got one that they call the Limit, Save, Grow Act of 2023. And again, when you have that kind of packaging, and then you see the commercials like, Tammy Baldwin voted against the Limit, Save, Grow Act, or whatever the case may be. But the Limit, Save, Grow Act is not, the packaging does not necessarily tell you the whole story.
Yeah, that's true. We can call it the Puppies and Rainbows Act of 2023. But colloquially, it was the Default on America Act, because if your listeners will recall, there was a period about a year ago where it felt like every week we were talking about the government shutting down and how it would impact Wisconsin workers and families. And, members of Congress, particularly Congressman Stile and Van Orden, were just digging their heels in and were refusing to compromise and refusing to support policies that would benefit the folks in their district. And instead, they voted for this Limit, Save, Grow Act or the Default on America Act, which would have cuts to veterans benefits, reduce access to Social Security and Medicare, slashing of food assistance, and so much more. And so the two of them both voted for that, which thankfully, with President Biden in the White House, that was never going to become law. But those are the types of votes that we're reminding constituents about as we help them share their stories and make sure that they're being heard by their members of Congress.
And it's not just the things that they are proposing, but the things that are maybe coming back up for renewal, specifically the Trump era tax plan, which folks will recall Ron Johnson was instrumental in helping, skew part of that tax break for something that helped, put money in his pocket. But with Trump saying, well, it was a big success and we'll renew it if you elect me, we're finding out now that the actual price tag of that 2017 law, which was once said it would blow $1 trillion hole in the deficit, and then the estimate went up to $2 trillion. The estimates are now, Megan, if I'm not mistaken, tickling $4 trillion. And if anybody had known that was the price tag in 2017, if they'd have been more honest about it, I don't think this thing would have necessarily passed the way it did.
Yeah, I would like to think that as well. But I think I've learned over the last several years that can't predict anyone's actions in Congress anymore. But you're right. You're absolutely right. I think as folks were saying back then, this is going to be a huge problem for our country economically. And we're seeing that to be the case. And to make matters worse, instead of members of Congress coming to the table and saying, hey, let's tweak this. Maybe we can change some of the policies a little bit so it's not going to be such a hit to our economy. We have congressional Republicans that are full steam ahead on expanding some of these provisions and making them permanent, all the while refusing to do things like renewing the expanded child tax credit or some of the other tax policies that we know actually benefit Wisconsin workers and families.
That is such an excellent point that, when the extended child care or child tax credit expired and they're like, well, it's expired and child poverty went right back up. They could have extended it, but they chose not to. And yet in your op-ed that folks can find over at upnorthnewswi.com, you ask very fair questions such as, why do Congressman Stile and Van Orden still fight to extend Trump-era tax breaks for those at the top? Is that something that, in fact, they are continuing to sponsor and support?
Yeah, it's funny, both Congressman Stile and Congressman Van Orden love to, jump on their media outlets of choice and share their views on different things, but happen to remain silent when it comes to this idea of the Trump era tax policies benefiting the wealthy and well-connected and leaving working Wisconsinites behind. And not only that, they refuse to comment on all these policies, as you mentioned, the expanded child tax credit, that have proven to lift something, upwards of 50% out of children out of poverty. They refuse to comment on those policies that are actually benefiting their constituents, but will love to talk about how they're going to continue to put money in the pockets of the wealthy and well-connected.
Coming back to things that they could have supported and choose not to, a lot of it centers around the Inflation Reduction Act, which, as we discussed last week with Melissa Baldoff, don't let the name fool you. Obviously, it was to target inflation, but it is a catch-all for so many things. Much of the time, we talk about climate issues that are in there and job creation. We have talked about Medicare being able to negotiate prescription drug prices. But in your column on our website, your very first question that you ask is, why does Congressman Style continue to oppose capping insulin costs, which was going to be a big feature of the Inflation Reduction Act? It had to be brought down to Medicare recipients, but you could broaden that if Congressman Style and others wanted to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, this has kind of been a tenet of our program over the last year, is to really highlight this fact because it impacts so many Wisconsin seniors. And Congressman Style likes to do a little song and dance and try to parse out why he didn't support it. And, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, he had the opportunity to bring down costs for seniors on Medicare, and he chose not to. And he continues to refuse to do that. He's had the opportunity to bring those costs down. And so our work will continue to focus on holding him accountable for this vote and others he has taken on refusing to bring down costs for folks in his district.
Another feature of the Inflation Reduction Act was making sure that there was a minimum tax on corporations, and so that they couldn't use loopholes and other tricks to effectively pay no taxes for all the benefits that they get of being a corporation here. Those are the kinds of things in the Inflation Reduction Act that if that were repealed, that provision of it would be repealed as well. So when it comes to the tax revenue that could, strengthen Medicare and Social Security and make sure corporations pay their fair share, you ask again fairly in there whether they support what President Biden is proposing in a 2025 budget, which would, do all of those things about corporate taxes, strengthen Medicare, strengthen Social Security. This doesn't sound like a gotcha question. It sounds like a pretty fair thing anybody should be asking their local congressperson.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we work, and talk to folks all around the state who are advocating for things like lower healthcare costs or more fair tax policies, or some of the things we talked about earlier, we hear from folks like Congressman Style and Congressman Van Orden who just throw up their hands and say, how are we going to pay for this? We don't have the money for this. And, I think the first thing we can do is look at the money we're putting in the pockets of the wealthy and well-connected. That certainly can be used to pay for some of these programs. And I think there's an incredible imbalance in the priorities of folks like Congressman Style and Congressman Van Orden when it comes to policies that are benefiting the working folks in the state versus the wealthy and well-connected.
And to learn more about what Opportunity Wisconsin is doing, go to opportunitywisconsin.org. Megan Rowe, Program Director, thank you very much for the visit. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
You have a great day.